The hushed stillness in Mr. Graham's opulent law office was suffocating, punctuated only by the crisp rustle of legal papers. Arthur and Eleanor Albright sat across from me, their faces a mixture of strained solemnity and barely contained eagerness. Their children, Leo and Sophie, fidgeted in their seats, bored but aware of the immense wealth hanging in the air. Mr. Graham, the old family lawyer, cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces before settling on me for a fraction longer. He continued reading the last will and testament of Mr. Alastair Harrison, a voice droning through clauses about minor bequests to distant relatives. Arthur shifted impatiently, his eyes darting to Eleanor, who subtly checked her expensive watch. Then, Mr. Graham's voice shifted, gaining a new, resonant gravity. And to my dear, cherished friend and companion, Clara Jenkins, for her unwavering kindness, her brilliant mind, and her true dedication to my well-being, a dedication my own family lamentably lacked, I bequeath the entirety of my remaining estate, including all properties, financial assets, and personal holdings. A choked gasp erupted from Eleanor, followed by Arthur's roar of disbelief, shattering the silence like glass. Their faces, once expectant, twisted into grotesque masks of shock, fury, and utter humiliation. The woman they had openly mocked as just the nanny now sat calmly, the rightful inheritor of everything they believed was theirs. My name is Clara Jenkins, and at 38 years old, I began working for the wealthy Albright family as a nanny, quickly forming a deep, respectful bond with their often-ignored patriarch, Mr. Alastair Harrison. His son, Arthur, and daughter-in-law, Eleanor, consistently treated me with condescending disdain, openly ridiculing my humble background and my chosen profession. They were completely unaware of the profound connection I shared with their father or his true intentions. My quiet dignity, born of a life lived by principle, would ultimately lead to a shocking reversal of fortunes, leaving the mocking family with nothing, while I, the dismissed nanny, inherited everything. For reasons of unforeseen family illness and economic downturn, I found myself navigating the complex world of the affluent as a nanny. It wasn't the path I had envisioned after earning my master's degree in literature, but life has a way of presenting unexpected detours. Despite the change in circumstances, my core values remained unwavering: kindness, integrity, intellectual curiosity, and a deep belief in the intrinsic worth of every individual, regardless of their social standing or bank account. I approached my work with professionalism and quiet dignity, valuing genuine connection over superficial displays of wealth. I began working for the Albright family 3 years prior. Arthur Albright was a high-powered real estate developer, and his wife, Eleanor, was a socialite, deeply immersed in charity galas and exclusive club memberships. They lived in a sprawling, meticulously manicured estate that reeked of old money and new ambition. Their children, 9-year-old Leo and 7-year-old Sophie, were bright but clearly absorbed the condescending attitudes of their parents. They treated me with a mixture of polite indifference and occasional, subtle demands, mirroring their parents' view of domestic staff as largely invisible, existing solely to serve their needs. My primary duties involved managing the children's schedules, overseeing their education, and ensuring their well-being. However, a significant part of my role quickly evolved to include caring for their ailing grandfather, Mr. Alastair Harrison. He was the true patriarch of the family, a man in his late 80s, sharp as a tack despite his physical frailty, and largely confined to study due to a chronic illness. Arthur and Eleanor, while living under his roof, or rather, in a separate wing of his vast estate, treated him with polite but distant regard. Their interactions with him were typically brief, transactional, and focused on superficial pleasantries, clearly designed to maintain appearances rather than foster genuine connection. They were impatiently awaiting his inevitable inheritance. Mr. Harrison, however, was a revelation. He was a man of immense intellect, a retired professor of history, with a dry wit and a profound curiosity about the world. He quickly saw through my nanny uniform and recognized the educated, compassionate woman beneath. Our bond formed quickly and organically. I didn't just attend to his physical needs, I became his intellectual companion. I would read to him for hours, not just the news, but classic literature, historical accounts, and philosophical texts. We would discuss the books, debate their merits, and share our thoughts on the human condition. He would tell me stories of his life, his travels, and his quiet disappointments with the modern world. He valued my opinions, listened intently, and treated me with a respect and warmth that was utterly absent from his own family. He saw my true worth, my quiet intelligence, and my genuine care for him and his grandchildren, a care that Arthur and Eleanor often lacked. Subtle red flags from Arthur and Eleanor were constant. They would often make condescending remarks about my station in life, always emphasizing the gap between their world and mine. "Clara, dear, you must understand. A prestigious education doesn't always lead to appropriate employment," Eleanor would simper, with a dismissive wave of her hand, implying my choice of profession was a personal failure. Arthur would openly scoff at my modest lifestyle or my aspirations beyond nannying. "Still hoping to open that little bookshop, Clara? Perhaps when you retire at 90, he'd sneer, making a thinly veiled joke about my age and limited financial prospects. They never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was the help, not family, not even a true professional in their esteemed circle. They never understood that my real wealth lay in my character, not in my bank account. And they certainly never imagined that Mr. Harrison, with his quiet wisdom, was watching, listening, and drawing his own conclusions about who truly deserved his legacy. The moment of the most profound public humiliation, the incident that burned a quiet resolve into my soul, occurred during the annual Harrison family Christmas Eve dinner. It was a lavish affair, held in the grand dining room, complete with crystal, silver, and enough pomp to rival a state dinner. I was nominally present, as I was responsible for ensuring Leo and Sophie behaved, but my role was strictly background. I was meant to be seen but not heard, a silent fixture, just the nanny. The evening was a parade of polite smiles and thinly veiled social climbing. Arthur and Eleanor, resplendent in their designer clothes, glided through the room, charming guests, subtly boasting about their latest acquisitions and making sure everyone knew they were the rightful heirs to the Harrison legacy. Mr. Harrison, despite his frail health, was wheeled into the dining room, looking somewhat distant, lost in thought. I sat at a small, discreet table in the corner with Leo and Sophie, ensuring they ate their vegetables and didn't spill anything on the antique Persian rug. Partway through the evening, as conversation flowed and champagne glasses clinked, Eleanor raised her voice, ostensibly to address her children, but clearly for the benefit of the surrounding guests. "Leo, Sophie, darling, remember what Mummy told you about aspirations? Always aim high. You don't want to end up, well, not fulfilling your potential, do you?" Her eyes flickered to me, a smirk playing on her lips. Some people are simply content with a more modest path. And that's fine, of course, for them. Arthur chuckled, a condescending, booming sound. "Indeed, Eleanor. One must always strive for excellence, not just in wealth, but in station. It's about legacy, isn't it? Leaving a mark on the world, not just tidying up." His gaze, sharp and dismissive, rested on me for a moment, clearly referencing my profession as a nanny, implying it was a trivial existence. A few of their guests, taking their cue, offered polite, knowing titters. The sting of their words was immediate and brutal. They weren't just making a general point about ambition. They were specifically, publicly, and cruelly mocking me. They were reducing my years of education, my dedication, my care for their children and their father to a mere act of tidying up, trivializing my worth and my intellect in front of their entire social circle. My cheeks burned, but I kept my posture straight, my eyes fixed on my plate. I felt the familiar wave of humiliation wash over me, but beneath it, something else stirred, a cold, hard resolve. I glanced at Mr. Harrison. His eyes, usually distant, were fixed on me, a deep sadness etched onto his face. He saw it all. He saw their cruelty, their blatant disrespect, and my quiet, dignified suffering. He tried to speak, a low murmur from his wheelchair, but Arthur, caught up in his self-aggrandizing narrative, simply patted his arm and continued his boisterous conversation. That night, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, I tended to Mr. Harrison, preparing him for bed. He held my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "Clara," he whispered, his voice raspy, "don't ever let their smallness define your greatness. They see only surfaces. You have a depth they can only dream of." His words were a balm to my wounded spirit, a profound validation that fortified my resolve. They had laughed at the nanny, but they had fundamentally misunderstood the quiet power of the gentle heart and the sharp mind they so carelessly dismissed. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that they would, one day, regret their arrogance. Following the Christmas Eve dinner, Mr. Harrison's health began to decline more rapidly. His chronic illness progressed, leaving him weaker, often in discomfort, and increasingly reliant on consistent care. Arthur and Eleanor, however, became even more distant, treating his deteriorating health as a tedious inconvenience that interfered with their social schedules and business ventures. Their visits grew shorter, more perfunctory, often accompanied by thinly veiled impatience. They were less concerned with his comfort and more preoccupied with ensuring he wasn't doing anything rash with his estate. They treated his illness not as a family tragedy, but as a countdown to their inheritance. During this period, I became Mr. Harrison's primary caregiver and, more importantly, his sole true companion. My duties expanded far beyond those of a nanny. I managed his medications, prepared his special meals, and ensured his comfort. But it was the emotional and intellectual companionship that truly defined our bond. I spent countless hours by his bedside, reading aloud from his vast library, histories, biographies, philosophical treatises. We discuss the books, debate their merits, and share our thoughts on the human condition. He would recount vivid stories from his life, his travels, his experiences as a professor, and his quiet observations about the world. He trusted me implicitly, confiding his deepest thoughts and his disappointments. He appreciated my genuine interest, my thoughtful questions, and my ability to connect with him on a level his own family seemed incapable of. He often reflected on his family's superficiality, their endless pursuit of material gain, and their lack of genuine warmth. "They see only the digits in my bank account, Clara," he would say, his voice laced with sadness. "They don't see the man or the values I tried to instill." He secretly observed my compassion, my tireless dedication, and the stark contrast between my genuine care and his family's dismissive neglect. I noticed he began spending more time alone with his lawyer, Mr. Graham, after our conversations, and he would often look at me with a profound, knowing gaze. He started making subtle comments, like, "One must ensure those who truly care are rewarded, Clara, or a legacy isn't just about blood, it's about spirit." I didn't fully grasp the depth of his intent then, but I sensed a shift, a quiet determination forming within him. As Mr. Harrison's health continued to wane, Arthur and Eleanor's contempt for me, the help, became even more pronounced and less disguised. They seemed to believe that my increased presence by Mr. Harrison's side was a calculated maneuver on my part, a cynical attempt to ingratiate myself for financial gain. The irony was suffocating. Their accusations were merely projections of their own avarice. "Still hovering around Father, Clara?" Eleanor would sneer, her eyes narrowed. "Trying to earn some extra brownie points? Don't think for a moment his affections will change the will." Arthur would openly mock my dedication. "She's practically taken up permanent residence in the sick room," he'd tell guests with a dismissive wave. Good help is so hard to find these days, isn't it? Especially those with such devotion. They were completely oblivious to the genuine, profound bond that had developed between Mr. Harrison and me, believing that money was the only motivator for human connection. Their mockery, however, became a powerful fuel for my quiet observations. I saw their greed firsthand. I witnessed their barely disguised impatience whenever Mr. Harrison struggled to speak, their dismissive sighs when he shared a memory, and their thinly veiled disgust when I had to perform more personal care duties for him. I watched Arthur discreetly go through Mr. Harrison's mail, searching for bank statements or correspondence from his lawyer. I observed Eleanor's blatant attempts to direct Mr. Harrison's conversations towards his assets, subtly suggesting investments or charitable donations that would benefit their social standing. Through it all, I maintained my composure, my professionalism a shield against their cruelty. But internally, I documented every slight, every condescending remark, every moment of their cold indifference towards Mr. Harrison. My compassion for him deepened, intertwined now with a quiet determination to see justice done, not just for myself, but for the gentle, wise man they so thoroughly underestimated. Mr. Harrison, with a knowing look in his eyes, would occasionally leave me small, cryptic gifts, a rare edition book, a faded photograph with a poignant inscription, a delicate antique compass. These weren't mere trinkets. They felt like silent acknowledgments, promises, and symbols of his profound trust and his true intentions for his legacy. He was seeing everything, and he was planning accordingly. Mr. Harrison's health entered its final, irreversible decline. His breaths grew shallower, his voice weaker, but his mind remained lucid, keenly observant. Arthur and Eleanor, sensing the end was near, intensified their frantic efforts to influence him. They were constantly hovering, not out of genuine concern, but out of a palpable anxiety about his vast estate. They made frequent, unannounced visits, often interrupting our quiet conversations, always trying to steer the discussion towards his will, his properties, his investments. They called his lawyer, Mr. Graham, relentlessly, trying to ascertain the specifics of the will, demanding updates, expressing concern that their father might be confused in his final days. Their desperation was almost comical, if not for the tragic circumstances. Mr. Harrison, however, remained resolute, maintaining a quiet dignity even in his weakening state. He skillfully deflected their intrusive questions, offering vague assurances or simply feigning fatigue. He had, I now understood, already made his decisions, and he intended to keep them secret until his passing. He knew precisely what Arthur and Eleanor were doing, and their transparent greed only solidified his resolve. He held private, discreet meetings with Mr. Graham, often after Arthur and Eleanor had left for their social engagements, ensuring his final wishes were meticulously documented and legally ironclad. He insisted on the utmost secrecy regarding the contents of his final will, explicitly instructing Mr. Graham not to disclose any details to his family until after his death. In his very last days, Mr. Harrison shared a final, poignant conversation with me. He held my hand, his gaze clear and filled with warmth. "Clara," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "you have been more of a child to me, more of a true family than anyone else. Your kindness, your spirit, you are truly remarkable. Thank you for everything." He squeezed my hand gently. "Don't worry," he added, a faint, knowing smile on his lips, "you will be taken care of. Far more than you can imagine. My legacy, it belongs to kindness, not to greed." His words were a profound blessing, a silent promise that filled my heart with a quiet understanding. He passed peacefully a few days later, in his sleep, with only me by his side. The Albrights, upon hearing the news, feigned profound grief for public consumption, but their true focus was immediately on the inheritance. They began jockeying for position, openly discussing how they would divide the properties, where they would invest the money, and how their social standing would be irrevocably cemented by this vast fortune. They believed, with absolute certainty, that everything was theirs. They were about to receive the shock of their lives, and I, the woman they had so carelessly dismissed, would be there to witness their reckoning. The day of the will reading felt less like a solemn occasion and more like a carefully staged play, with Arthur and Eleanor Albright as the utterly unprepared performers. They arrived at Mr. Graham's office in their most expensive morning attire, their faces composed in expressions of performative grief, though their eyes sparkled with barely concealed avarice. Leo and Sophie, dressed in miniature versions of their parents' somber finery, sat rigidly beside them, clearly drilled on appropriate funeral etiquette. I arrived quietly, a few minutes before the scheduled time, dressed simply but respectfully, invited by Mr. Graham himself. The Albrights barely acknowledged my presence, offering only a fleeting, condescending glance as I took a seat in the corner, far from their imposing cluster. They clearly considered me an irrelevant, temporary fixture, still, just the nanny. Mr. Graham, a man whose stern demeanor hid a dry sense of humor, began to read Mr. Harrison's last will and testament. His voice was steady as he enumerated various minor bequests, small sums to distant cousins, charitable donations to obscure academic institutions. Arthur and Eleanor shifted restlessly, their impatience growing with each passing clause, waiting for the main event, the colossal inheritance they believed was their birthright. I sat calmly, my hands folded in my lap, remembering Mr. Harrison's final, knowing smile, and a quiet sense of anticipation filled me. Then, Mr. Graham paused, took a sip of water, and turned a new page. The shift in his tone was subtle but profound, imbued with a quiet gravitas. And now he announced, his gaze sweeping over the Albrights, then resting pointedly on me, for the distribution of the primary estate. He cleared his throat. To my son, Arthur Albright, and my daughter-in-law, Eleanor Albright, and their issue, I leave nothing further. Their material needs are, I believe, already amply met by their own ventures. Furthermore, their demonstrated lack of genuine affection and their dismissive and often cruel treatment of both myself and those who truly provided me comfort and companionship in my final years has led me to a necessary and deliberate decision. A collective gasp ripped through the room. Arthur's face turned an alarming shade of crimson, and Eleanor's perfectly painted mouth fell open, a silent scream frozen on her lips. They exchanged furious glances, then glared at Mr. Graham, as if he had misread something vital. Mr. Graham, however, continued, his voice resonating with authority. Therefore, to my dear, cherished friend and companion, Clara Jenkins, for her unwavering kindness, her brilliant mind, her intellectual companionship, and her true, selfless dedication to my well-being, a dedication my own family lamentably lacked, I bequeath the entirety of my remaining estate, including all properties, financial assets, and personal holdings. He then detailed the vast fortune, the sprawling estate we were sitting in, the extensive investment portfolios, the valuable art collection, the private jet, the offshore accounts, everything. This inheritance, he concluded, looking directly at me, is to be utilized as she sees fit, a testament to her character and a foundation for a life of purpose, as she has truly understood the meaning of a life well lived. The room erupted. Arthur shot out of his chair, his face contorted with unbridled fury. What? This is an outrage. It's a travesty. That nanny. You manipulative gold digger. He pointed a trembling finger at me. This is a fraud. My father was senile. He was unduly influenced. Eleanor burst into loud, theatrical sobs, clutching her chest. How could he do this to us? To his own blood. Leo and Sophie, confused but sensing the magnitude of their parents' distress, began to cry. I remained seated, my composure unwavering, a quiet sense of triumph blossoming in my chest. I met Arthur's furious gaze, then Eleanor's tear-streaked face. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile, but my eyes held a quiet, undeniable message. You mocked me. You dismissed me. You underestimated the old man, and you underestimated me. This is the consequence of your arrogance and your cruelty. Mr. Graham, with a steely gaze, calmly assured them the will is meticulously drafted, legally binding, and ironclad. The family who had treated me as invisible, who had scorned my humble station, now sat utterly humiliated, stripped of the fortune they believed was rightfully theirs, while I, the once mocked Nanny, inherited everything. In the wake of that explosive will reading, the lives of Arthur and Eleanor Albright spectacularly unraveled. Their desperate attempts to contest the will were swiftly dismissed by the courts, further highlighting their public humiliation. The story, a delicious piece of gossip about the wealthy family disinherited by their own father in favor of their nanny, quickly leaked to the press. Their carefully constructed image of respectability shattered, replaced by public ridicule and social ostracization. Without the vast inheritance they had so confidently expected, their lavish lifestyle became unsustainable. Their ventures proved to be less successful without their father's implied backing, and within a few years, they faced significant financial difficulties, forced to sell off assets and drastically downsize their lives. They were left with nothing but their pride, which had always been their greatest weakness, now severely wounded. As for me, Clara Jenkins, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. I used Mr. Harrison's fortune wisely, honoring his legacy and his values. I established a substantial foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting education for underprivileged children and providing compassionate care for the elderly, causes we had often discussed. I funded scholarships, built community centers, and ensured that his immense wealth would be used to create genuine, lasting good in the world, reflecting the kindness he had shown me. I also quietly invested in a small, independent bookstore, a long-held dream, where I continued to nurture my love for literature and connection. I continued to live a life of quiet purpose and profound gratitude, free from the constraints of financial worry, but always mindful of the man who had seen my true worth. Mr. Harrison's estate became a hub for genuine compassion and intellectual growth, a stark contrast to the superficiality that once permeated its halls. The once mocked nanny now moved through the world with an undeniable gravitas, a living testament to Mr. Harrison's wisdom and the power of true character. This entire experience taught me that true wealth lies not in material possessions or bloodlines, but in the richness of one's character, the depth of one's compassion, and the integrity of one's spirit. Mr. Harrison's legacy was not merely his money, but the profound lesson he imparted, that kindness, dignity, and genuine connection will always outweigh greed, arrogance, and superficiality. He saw beyond the uniform and recognized the soul, and in doing so, he orchestrated a perfect, poetic justice. When all the superficial markers of success are stripped away, what truly defines a person's legacy and who truly deserves to inherit the fruits of a lifetime's labor?